Here's what the DCU does better than the MCU. Hey there everybody! With Marvel and DC, it shouldn't really be a competition. Fans are just excited to see the characters they know and love from comic books being brought to the big screen in ways that are a spectacle and fun to watch, and that's true. But the MCU is slightly better in a lot of ways. Mainly, it's considered the best at creating a shared universe, and it did that best because it did it first, and then it took its time to build what has now become one of the biggest franchises in the entire world. But DCU does do a few things better. First and foremost, we're going to say the cinematography and the score in DC typically outshines that of Marvel. When you look at movies like Batman vs. Superman, Zack Snyder really does know how to shoot a movie. Sure, a lot of times he leans into things that are dark and people complain that it's difficult to see, but when you do see it, it's absolutely beautiful. He has a knack for creating a shot that is visually appealing, and that's something that Marvel doesn't always focus on. Another thing we're going to talk about here is when it comes to R-rated film. Sure, you look at Marvel and you got things like Deadpool and you got things like Logan. Those are fantastic movies, but they're not technically part of the MCU, at least not yet. With the new shared universe coming in that goes into the multiverse, things like Deadpool and Logan, those characters are going to come join the MCU, but at the moment, they're not really there. So if we're talking R-rated films, the MCU doesn't have any yet. When you look at the DCU, we've got Birds of Prey and we have the Suicide Squad, and both of those movies were absolutely amazing. Now, Birds of Prey was follow-up with Harley Quinn. Now we know that Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn has just been a shining point of the DCU, even when things were floundering. You look at the first Suicide Squad, it is not considered a great movie. In fact, that movie's pretty terrible, but Harley Quinn was a high point, so much so that they've kept her around and used her in multiple different movies, including Birds of Prey, where she got to play as the main character. Now, the Suicide Squad, which kind of acted as a reboot semi-sequel to the first one, it didn't get a huge box office, but that's because it came out during the pandemic and it ended up going to HBO Max, where it had a great shelf life. People were watching that movie on there a lot. I know I watched it 2 or 3 times. The action, the comedy, everything was used perfectly, and it made good use of the R rating. It didn't lean into it too heavily to become exploitative. It just used that R rating to create something that was fun for adults to watch, and it's great. The last point we're really going to talk about here is television. Now, the MCU is leaning heavy into their television lineup on Disney+, and some of those shows have been great, and a lot have been kind of middling, and some have been genuinely not very good. But you look at really the only TV show that DCU has put out, and that is Peacemaker. Now sure, they've only got one, but they went with a quality over quantity, and Peacemaker is by far the superior show. It outshines everything the MCU has put out on Disney Plus so far, and we know that we're getting a season 2. Now, James Gunn was able to take a character like Peacemaker, who was not a character you would expect to lead a show following the Suicide Squad. In fact, he was kind of a villain in the Suicide Squad, which was another thing that did really well. It actually made the team of villains, they were straight up villains, and Peacemaker was one of the biggest in there, especially when he, spoiler alert, turned on the Suicide Squad and became like a villain on top of a villain. Now, they gave him his own TV show and really gave him a character arc that was meaningful, a character arc that was much deeper and much more impactful than anything the MCU has done yet. I think the biggest thing the MCU has done with a giant character arc in television is Loki, which is one of their better shows. With James Gunn now taking the reins on the DCU, it's sure to blow up. James Gunn is a perfect person to lead this. We've seen how he does with Guardians of the Galaxy, and then even more with Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad. He can create a story that is so fun, the action is so great, and it is so heartfelt and meaningful that it is just a perfectly well-rounded story. So with him in the lead at DCU, the DCU is sure to come up on a rise here. It's sure to start competing with the MCU in ways that it never has before. Zack Snyder has a huge fan base, but he was not the right guy to lead the DCU because his movies were too polarizing. They weren't crowd pleasers as a whole because there was always one side that loved them and one side that hated them. When you have James Gunn in there, he has a much more well-rounded vision that is more likely to please the crowd as a whole. So what do you think? Will the DCU rise up? Will it be able to compete financially at the box office and with fans with the MCU, which most fans are saying has been on a decline? Let us know in the comments. Drop us a follow on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more great content.